Hi there, Randy Potter here. Welcome back to my garden and another episode of Growing Together, where you can join me in my garden as we learn all about the fun and fundamentals of gardening. So if you've seen us before, you've seen us plant our vegetables, and I just wanted to give you an update on those. Here's a couple of our hatch peppers, one of my favorites. They have a little bit of heat, but not too much, a lot of flavor. You can pop them on the grill, eat them raw. They're great for everything. But what I wanted to show you about these is the different stages of ripeness. You'll see this one here is pretty green, whereas this one's got that nice deep red color. And I just wanted to let you know that that's what all peppers are gonna do. If you ever see green pepper in the store, that's actually just a yellow, red, or orange pepper that hasn't changed color yet. So that's why it's a little less sweet and you use it a little differently in your cooking. But the veggies here are doing great. And I actually just came back from a vacation and I did not set up a good watering system for my plants, which I don't recommend. I didn't call a neighbor, I didn't set up a timer or anything like that. I kind of just let them go, and we had a dry week. So I was a little worried to be coming home to dead plants, but my plants are doing great. They're very healthy. They're still fruiting veggies, and I really attribute that to the healthy potting soil medium and the way we set up ourselves for success from the start to make sure our moisture was regulated and everything like that. But as I said, I just got back from vacation because the weather's getting a little cooler, kids are going back to school, football season's starting up, and believe it or not, it's already fall, but that doesn't mean that gardening has to end. There's still, actually fall is a great time for gardening, including vegetables, landscaping. You can plant shrubs and perennials all the way until the ground is frozen, lawn care, and of course, flowers, which is what we're gonna talk about today, how you can add some ornamentals to your garden this fall to take things to the next level. So come on with me as we grow together and check out some fun different things. So, you'll see probably some old favorites, and hopefully you'll learn some new things with our selection here. We're going to talk about one of my personal favorites, which are pansies. We're also going to talk about probably the real star of the fall flowering show, which are chrysanthemums, or mums as we call them. We've also got some fun little different things which we'll talk about, like ornamental peppers and some blooming perennials, which we'll get to in just a little bit. But like I said, I wanted to start off with one of my personal favorite flowers of all flowers, the pansy, or violas. You'll notice there's two different types, both pansies and violas, which are often grouped together and just referred to as pansies, but they are different flowers. The pansies are a little bit larger versus the violas, and the way that you can truly tell is the blooms. If you look very closely at a pansy, you'll see that they have two petals pointing pretty much straight up. Then they have two petals pointing to the sides and one petal pointing straight down, and that's the telltale sign of a pansy. Two up, two to the side, and one down. Versus a viola, which really kind of has more three petals pointing up and then one straight down. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but if you ever take a good close look at violas and pansies and you're not quite sure, that's an easy way to, the telltale sign of which is which. But it doesn't really matter. For all intents and purposes, they're the same. They're gonna grow the same. You can use them the same. You might also know violas as violets, or sometimes people call them Johnny Jump Ups. But they're my favorites for a few different reasons. The first reason is that they are tough. Anyone who knows me has probably heard me say this. If anyone in your lifetime ever calls you a pansy, they probably mean it as an insult, probably mean you're a little soft or something like that. But you should just smile and say thank you, because in the world of flowers, pansies are actually one of the toughest little flowers around. They do well in full sun, but they're also remarkably shade tolerant, and they're frost resistant. If you plant your annuals, for example, and you know, we get through, even if you can keep them going all the way through the heat of summer into fall, eventually that cold frost is gonna come and your flowers are gonna die. But pansies will just keep on blooming through the cold. I've seen pansies bloom through cold. Even after being buried by snow, they'll come back and keep blooming. I've seen them go all the way through January. So they're really tough little flowers, and I think you should give them a shot. So we're gonna talk about how you can spruce up your garden at this time of year using some pansies. So come on with me and we'll check it out. Okay, so as I said, it's the end of summer and things have gotten pretty hot and dry over the past few weeks, so it's not unusual for your annual planters and things like that to start looking a little petered out at this time of year. I certainly have a few of those myself. like this one here. This pot's looked great all year, but at this point in the summer, especially after being away for a week, it's kind of gotten, some critters have gotten to it. Things have, you know, just kind of passed their peak. So even though my Broelia is hanging on there with a bloom or two left, I'm gonna go ahead and spruce things up a bit by adding a pop of color with pansies, which I know are not only gonna last through the fall, but potentially even into the winter. So this is really gonna add many more months to your gardening season, brightens up the place, and it keeps things fun for you. So I'll show you a quick little demonstration on how to do that. Very simple, very similar to some other plantings that we've done. And we're gonna continue to learn and, you know, really drive home those core concepts of gardening, which are going to help you not just with pansies and flowers, but with any kind of growing, houseplants, herbs, whatever. All the things like light, water, and soil are all going to affect those. So we'll go ahead and see how those affect our pansies here. So first things first, we're obviously going to have to take out some of our older plants. So like I said, I had this Broelia here, so pretty much just like weeding, I'm going to go ahead and dig that out by the roots there. All right, and I'm gonna save it because I do like to compost my plants and things like that. That's good, rich, organic material that I can add to my compost pile. This here was a little Lysimachia, which is a great little trailing plant if you ever wanna add that to your summer containers. And I could probably leave that in here if I wanted to. I think it would probably do okay for fall, but I really like a pot just bursting full of pansies, so that's what I'm gonna go for here. So I'm just gonna dig those out, dig out a few little clumps, and some of that old soil, but I don't need to empty this. This is still good, rich organic soil. You know, I like to use a nice healthy soil to start off with, and it's certainly still fine after just a few months of those plants growing in there. So I'm just gonna go ahead and clear a little bit of space out, as you might with any pot. And the great thing about pansies is that you can often find them in what are called pre-finished pots, which are pretty much just ready to go. You can grab them at the store, set them on your table or porch, and they're good to go. Or you can get them in what are called flats or cell packs, which are basically just trays full of, you know, kind of individualized plants. And these are great if you're gonna plant a large quantity. If you're gonna cover a section of your yard or you like to mix and match, these are great. Pansies are really fun to mix and match. They come in all different colors, even some blues, which are very hard to find in the gardening world and very highly sought after, but they have white, yellow, purples. You can really add a lot of color to your fall garden with pansies. So I picked out a nice mix of kind of purples and yellows, which are some of my favorite, and we're gonna go ahead and mix those in here too. Spacing is kind of up to you. You can probably, most tags are gonna recommend that you space them about 10 to 12 inches apart if you want to. If I were planting these in the garden, I would probably leave about a foot between each one because they will grow and fill in. But planting in my container, I'd really like to fill it up a little bit sooner. So you can go ahead and squeeze them a little closer if you want to. That won't hurt the plants. They'll be perfectly fine. They'll grow together and fill in their pot perfectly fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix in probably, this is probably about an 8-inch pot or so in diameter. So I'm gonna go ahead and probably put about 5 or so in. But that part, like I said, up to you. There's a little leeway there. You can go ahead and mix and match colors and have fun with it. So I'm just gonna gently tuck those into the soil, just kind of lay them out and arrange them as I might. We'll maybe mix in some different colors here from my tray. Maybe get like an orange or a yellow in there. Some more purples. So I'm just gonna tuck those right into my pot, just as I would with, you know, an annual or any flower. Just get those roots covered in the soil. Right now I'm just kind of laying them in to make sure I have things spaced and arranged well, because you never know how something's going to look until you see it. So I always say try it. If you have an opportunity to move your plants around and experiment a little bit, go ahead and do it, because you might have this vision of what this is going to turn out to look like, and then when you put it all together, it doesn't quite turn out exactly as you thought, which actually can be part of the fun. A lot of times that's how you'll discover, you know, it's something even better, something different and exciting that you would have never thought of had you not just gone ahead and tried it. So dive in, experiment there. So I think that'll be a decent arrangement. We've got some, they're kind of flopping over, that's okay, no big deal. They're gonna be perfectly healthy, and we'll spruce those up in just a minute. So I've got those tucked in there. Now that I've taken a lot of those plants out and some of the soil off the top, I am gonna add a little bit more potting soil. So if you've gardened with me before, you might remember the Gardener's Gold, which is one of my favorite potting soils. But you can find a lot of very nutrient-rich potting soils at your local independent garden center, which, you know, have all those microbial nutrients and things like that to create a healthy ecosystem within your own pot, which again is going to help regulate your moisture. It's going to give the plants the food that they need to thrive. So even if you're not feeding this plant or watering it all the time, your pot's still probably going to be in pretty good shape. So that's why I like to do that. I think if you invest a little bit in just, a nicer soil, then basically what I would consider, bottom of the line stuff, that little bit of investment can really save you a lot of time, effort, and money in the long run. So I'm just going to go ahead and make sure all my roots are covered up there and get those tucked in. Again, you don't need to squeeze them in there or anything like that, but we'll just go ahead and get those tucked in there. And now those are going to go ahead and grow. Pansies are very prunable. If they start to get a little leggy and weird, you can take your pruners and just clip them right off. Don't be afraid to do that. Now the one thing about pansies that is also very neat is that they're actually edible. If you do happen to prune your leggy pansies and you want to add them on a salad, go ahead. They're a great garnish. They actually have kind of a sweet little flavor, and you'll really impress your dinner guests if you've got flowers on your plates there. The only downside of that is that people are not the only ones who might like to eat pansies. In fact, they're a favorite of rabbits and or deer. So if you have those critters in your yard, you might want to try, checking out a way to prevent them. I think a net draped over, like if you have a section in your yard, can work just great. One item that I like to use, there's lots of different sprays on the market that'll certainly work for you. And one of the ones that I like to use is just, it's a very basic animal repellent, hot pepper wax, and that's exactly what it is. It's derived from hot peppers, and basically it just makes these way too hot and spicy to eat. So, just a couple quick spritzes of that will keep the rabbits away from your pansies, because that can be a bummer whenever you plant them and they look great and you wake up the next morning and they've been nibbled away. But it happens sometimes. Don't let it get you down. They'll grow back. They're just doing a little extra pruning for you. That's all part of gardening, is just living and learning and experimenting. So that's pretty much it. Pretty simple. The one last thing I would do is just water that in with a watering can or something like that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about watering whenever we talk about our next flower here, the chrysanthemum. So why don't you come on with me and we'll go ahead and dive into the world of mums and learn more about gardening. So come on. Okay, and here we have probably the main star of the fall blooming show, the chrysanthemum. So there's a few key things that I'd really like to discuss about chrysanthemums, about the way they grow, and some things that might be helpful whenever you're growing your own and also shopping for them at your garden centers in the fall here coming up. So the first is that chrysanthemums are a type of perennial. And if you happen to catch our episode on perennials, you would have learned that they have a limited bloom window. What that means is basically, unlike an annual, which is going to bloom and bloom and bloom all through the summer, perennials typically just bloom for a few weeks. Now that does vary on the type of perennial, how long your window's open and when it starts, etc. And there's some variation within mums that we're going to get into here. But a quick note about that, just because you hear me say that a chrysanthemum is a perennial, it does not mean that all mums are going to come back in your climate. There are tons and tons of different varieties of mums in all kinds of different colors. They have different leaf shapes, different flower types. Some of them look a little bit more daisy-like. Some of them get really extravagant, florally blooms. And there's also variation on how cold they can survive in the winters. So if you're looking for what's called a hardy mum in your area, just check with the staff of your local garden center, and they can probably help you. I know at Sorgels we carry something called an igloo mum, which is in fact hardy in our zone. Again, in Pittsburgh, where we are right on the verge of zone 6 and 5. So remember, anything that has a plant tag certified to zone 6, 5 or below is going to survive those colder temperatures. Lower zone, lower temperatures. Just keep that in mind there. So most varieties of mums are probably actually not going to make it in Pittsburgh, but there are some that will. So if you want to plant a mum in an area that's going to come back year to year and give you those blooms, then that would be what you're looking for. If you're just looking to add a pop of color for the fall and you don't want to worry about it next year, that's probably most of the floral mums that you're going to see. So just keep that in mind when you're shopping. Now, another point about the bloom window that I was talking about is that window is going to be open at different times, not just for different plants, but for different mums too. So I selected these to show you a few different stages. So for example, this one right here looks great, and this is probably about in peak bloom. It's got some flowers that are fully open. It's got a few more that are still going to keep coming, but I would say this is probably right at the peak of its bloom. They kind of have a bell curve to their blooms. They'll start opening up, then they'll be full bloom, and then they'll kind of start to peter out. So this one's probably in full bloom. So if I were having a garden party this weekend and I wanted to have some nice pots on the deck or something like that to add some color, I would probably pick out something like this. Now, if you want to have your color in a few weeks, that might be whenever you want to look at the stage of bloom, something a little bit earlier. So we'll step back one step. This plant right here, you can see kind of in between. It's got a lot of buds that are still yet to open up, but it's still showing some color. So probably, in about a week or two, this will be fully opened, and then another week or two after that, it'll be kind of petering out. So you probably have about 3 to 4 week bloom window for mums. It's not that long, so keep that in mind. I think a lot of people make the mistake of they buy this mum that looks beautiful in the store, not realizing that it's already halfway through its bloom cycle. Then when they take it home and it starts to not look so great, a lot of people get discouraged and think they did something wrong. That's not the case. It's just the natural life habit of the plant, so don't be discouraged. Just kind of, again, inform the way you're purchasing and planning with those concepts. So you'll see some other ones that, again, just to show you the different stages, this plant right here, just starting to set its buds. You can't really even see the buds on that plant. So that one is probably gonna be, probably another 2 to 3 weeks before this one's even showing color. So, we're getting into September here. If I want plants, into September, or I'm sorry, color, September into October, I might pick something that's very early in its bloom stages versus something like this, which is maybe a week or two ahead. You can see those buds have set, and in a couple weeks, those are gonna be opening up. And then ultimately, like I said, your plant's gonna open up fully, and then, sad as it is, flowers are fleeting. That's part of their magic, is that they don't last forever. Especially unlike a pansy, which will last through winter, mums are gonna start to pass their peak, and you can see that's what's happening there to this one. Now you can still keep it looking nice by just doing some simple deadheading and popping off those dead blooms there, and that'll help keep the plant looking healthy and pretty. But it is, like I said, it does have a perennial bloom habit. So unlike your annuals and things like that, deadheading these is not going to create more blooms. It's just going to keep, the brown off your plant and keep the colors that you want, rather than those that maybe don't look so great sometimes. But you can keep them perked up and keep them looking nice a little bit longer that way. But again, eventually it's going to pass its peak and be done blooming. So that's kind of the lowdown on mums. Now, if you're looking for a deal, like I said, a hardy mum, a perennial mum that's going to come back year to year, sometimes you can find them at your local garden center a little past bloom, and sometimes that's a savvy time to buy them because sometimes they'll be on sale. If mums are not your favorite thing, that's perfectly fine. There's lots of other awesome options in the fall. A lot of people, I think, they think gardening is just for the springtime. They don't realize the whole world of opportunity that fall gardening presents. And here's a couple neat things that you might want to try if you're looking for something different. There's a lot of edible things actually that are really neat. If you find some ornamental kales, ornamental cabbages, not only things that you can add in salads, but that actually look really nice. Local garden centers are going to have a lot of really neat ones. The industry is really exploded in terms of the different varieties that they're breeding, all kinds of different colors and shapes and things like that. And here's something that I selected that I think are kind of neat and unique that we get a lot of questions about at the garden center, and that would be these. These are a type of ornamental pepper. Now, when you hear the word ornamental pepper, that confuses people. Probably the number one question that we get about our ornamental peppers is, are they edible? And in fact, they are. They're a pepper just like any other pepper in terms of, what's in them. They're not gonna be toxic or anything like that. But I would, a note of caution about anytime you see the word ornamental at a garden center, there is a chance that that plant is grown specifically for ornamental purposes and has been treated in ways that are not FDA approved for food. So it might be unsafe to eat. Now this one I got from Sorgo Home and Garden, so I know that we didn't spray it with anything, that would affect its edibility, but you don't know that. So if you see the word ornamental, again, just a note of caution. Another thing about the ornamental peppers is even though they are edible, most of them are grown specifically for their looks, so oftentimes they're really just not the tastiest pepper. I think they're more fun just to grow for looks rather than, and some of them actually are brutally spicy without much flavor, so you got to be careful with them. If you really want to try them out, again, you're not going to hurt yourself by eating them probably, but these are a few different types of ornamental peppers, and they come in all different types of shapes and colors. As you can see, this one's kind of your standard chili pepper look versus something like this, which again, very unique, gives you something really different. You can add that to your garden, or I think they're great in planters. You know, if you were to add that, even with pansies around it or something like that, it gives you just something very different, unique, and certainly a different world of color than mums might represent. Mums come in all different colors, from whites to reds, oranges and yellows, to even more springtime colors like pinks and purples. But again, you can increase your color palette by exploring some different options that you might not have considered before in the fall. So that's kind of the lowdown on some ornamental peppers. And another option that you can explore are other perennials. As I said, mums are a type of perennials, and if you caught our last episode, you learned a lot about some great perennial options. But there's some fall blooming perennials, and these are things that are going to come back year to year. We'll give you foliage in the springtime and the summertime, and then we'll give you that pop of color with some blooms in the fall. A favorite of mine here is this is a fall blooming clematis. So it doesn't have any flowers yet, but if you look closely, it's got those buds that are setting. So just like the mums, in a few weeks, those buds are going to be opening up and just covering these vines in white, beautiful flowers. They're great. They're great to trail over. You can see this flowing over the pot. They're good trailers, or if you give them a lattice or something to climb on, very vigorous climbers. So they're a great vining plant to add some fall color. There is also spring blooming varieties. So you could have a garden or a trellis with just clematis that'll hit multiple seasons of bloom time if you do it strategically. So that's a good option. There's lots of other options. This is a liriope. You can see this one's starting to bloom right now. It's got those delicate little purple flowers as well as a grassy look. So I just selected those to show you, again, just the different looks that you can get. You really do have a lot of options even in fall gardening. And as I said, you can plant really until the ground is frozen. Sometimes people think, oh, I missed the growing season, and it's really only, September, October. The ground isn't frozen yet. You can plant really up until that time, so don't be afraid to try it out. And again, that's a good time to maybe find some deals at your local garden center. Maybe find a plant on sale, stick it in the ground and see what happens. Don't be shy, experiment. That's not only how you're gonna end up with some wonderful things in your garden, it's a great way to learn. One final blooming perennial that I selected here that looks really great right now is just opening up. These are anemones, and they've got just a beautiful delicate flower rising over a nice lush foliage there. They come in different colors, different shapes and sizes as well there. But again, that gives you you can see how different of a flower that gives you than either the clematis, liriope, or even the mums. It gives you a lot of options to create contrast within your garden, even in a season which you might not have thought that possible. Another nice thing about anemones is that the deer do not like these ones. So they're a great deer-resistant option that's going to give you fall blooms in the fall season. So those are just a few options. There's a lot more options. Online is a great resource to find those, but my best suggestion is just take a routine walk through your garden center throughout the season. A lot of people go in spring, get everything they need, and then they're done for the year, and that's okay if that's your thing. But if you want to learn and maybe increase your growing time, learn how things are growing, take a walk through the garden center in July, and then in August, and then September. That's whenever you're going to see, exactly how things look, what's blooming when. You might get this list online, but then that has all these plants listed, which are great. But then whenever you're walking through the garden center, you see something that you fall in love with that you would have never known existed. So again, just be open to different options, explore, and try some things out. A quick note about mums is that and any plant really, is that I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about some watering. Now, a couple of concepts about watering that are important to remember. We get asked these questions all the time, so if you've struggled with these issues, it's very common. Don't be shy about that. That's okay. Again, that's how we learn and grow together. So a couple important things to remember is if you have your plant in a pot or in the ground, these are things that are going to affect how much water it needs. Typically, plants in pots are going to need more water because there's a lot less space to hold on to water. All right, so if I have a small plant in a big pot like this one, there's a lot of soil to hold on to the water. So this pot is actually pretty heavy because it's full of soil and water. There's not a ton of plant material because this plant was grown outside. This plant was grown in a greenhouse where it was covered from the elements and it was able to be fed. So I have a much larger plant compared to the size of the pot, which looks really nice, but that's going to mean more watering because there's less soil to retain that water, and that soil is going to be filled with roots too, so keep that in mind. And one other thing I wanted to mention is when you're watering is the quantity of water. I was talking to my mom recently, and she had been watering the correct frequency, you know, about once a week or so on her plants, but I discovered that I don't think she was watering with quite enough quantity. So when you water a plant, you really want to saturate the soil. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of fill this one up. I could run water through this plant all day long, and I'm not going to overwater it. But if I were to give it just a cup of water every single day for a week or two, I'm going to overwater it. So as you see there now, that water that I just put in is starting to drain out the bottom. That's how I know this pot has now been filled and saturated with water, and that's probably good to go for, you know, another week or so. I'll keep an eye on it, certainly. If it's really dry and sunny, I might need to hit it again soon. But again, I just wanted to make the point that that water's flowing out of the pot. You really saturate your plants. Don't be afraid to do that. The only thing that you have to worry about is if this plant didn't drain and it just sat in water, that's when you're going to have potential issues. So drainage is very important when you're watering. Just make sure you saturate your plants and but prevent them from sitting in a puddle of water for too long. And one last thing that's really fun in the fall that I would suggest you try if you haven't are bulbs. Now, whenever you're planting bulbs in the fall, you want to think spring. So there's summer blooming bulbs and there's spring blooming bulbs. So these are bulbs that you're going to plant in the fall, leave them alone all winter, and they're going to pop up in early spring. So these are things like daffodils and tulips and hyacinths, things that you might think of as like kind of Easter time flowers. But there's a lot of great other unique options and things like that to try. Like I said, fall is a good time for veggie gardening, but so is springtime, and you can plant some garlic. In the fall, you just pop them in the ground, you'll have some garlic, but there's also some, you know, plenty of ornamental things. The one that's really popular are alliums. They're related to garlic and onions. They give you really fun, it's really fun to watch them just come up in the springtime on their own. Like I said, there's traditional tulips, as well as some new kind of more unique varieties of tulips and crocuses, snowdrop. There's tons and tons of different fall bulbs, and they're really easy to plant. Biggest question is, when do you plant them? Ideally, you want to plant them in most bulbs, most fall planting bulbs, around the time when nighttime temperatures are between 40 and 50 degrees. So that's probably going to be September, October. That's probably your sweet spot, but there's some leeway either way. They're very forgiving. You just kind of, and then the other question is, how deep do I plant them? Most bulbs are going to have some recommendation there as far as how deep to go. But again, it's not too hard. You just kind of stick them in the ground, cover them up with soil, let them go for the winter, and then it's like magic. Your garden will just burst to life in the spring. It's super fun, and it's a great way to add a pop of color at an inexpensive price. So that's kind of the quick rundown on fall planting. Hopefully you learned some things. I hope that you explore the fall opportunity to add some color to your garden and just keep on learning and growing together. So thanks for joining me. I'm excited to see you next time in our garden. We'll see you soon.